So we come now to the last of the seven churches to which Jesus, through John, speaks. And we remember seven, the symbol of completeness. And so we remember that, yes, these letters or proclamations were specific to each individual church, each individual group of Christians. And we notice that through how each letter often makes reference to specific geography and location. And yet they were also, as John writes them, intended to be read by all of the churches. And we see that at the end of each of the proclamations. To him who has an ear, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. But as God's living word, they also, as we have seen, continue to speak to the church, to the people of God today. And so we come to this last of the letters, the letter to Laodicea, probably the most well known, but often the most misinterpreted or misunderstood. Laodicea was some 60 miles from Philadelphia, and it sits at the end of that circular trade route that we saw on the map that we've looked at occasionally. And across the valley from Laodicea was the city of Hierapolis. Hierapolis had hot springs, and they were useful and used for therapeutic bathing, a little bit like sort of the hot baths in Bath and other places around the UK. And people from Laodicea would have seen, as they looked over to Hierapolis, they would have seen the calcium carbonate deposits that had come out of this hot water as it ran down the hillside, or as it was sort of channeled down the hillside. And then, thinking of water, still 10 miles or so further along, sat the city of Colossae. Paul writes to Colossae. We know that he references Laodicea in his letters too. And Colossae had cold springs, a good supply of refreshing cold water. But Laodicea, built on a crossroads of trade routes, actually didn't have a very good water supply at all. And so it was dependent upon water coming from the Colossae way via aqueducts, a town some 5 miles away. And so as the water traveled, it warmed up, and excavation shows this. And so it was not sufficiently hot that all of the calcium carbonate deposits had sort of come out of the water, and neither was it cold. So their water was both lukewarm and not at all nice to drink. Laodicea also had two other sort of claims to fame in its day, to three others. One, it was, as all of these on trade routes, it was quite a wealthy city. Secondly, it was a center of medical excellence, and particularly with cream for eyes. And we see reference to that clearly coming up. But it was also well known as a wool producing city. So a little bit like we might sort of choose to buy an Aran sweater. That's where you'd go for your Aran sweaters of the day, the equivalent of. So Laodicea had these sort of things that the city was known for. And so Jesus writes this letter, or Jesus speaks to this church, and it's a harsh letter. And Jesus says, you are neither cold nor hot. But notice in verse 16 how that's reversed. Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. And often we misunderstand this, and we see it as relating to our passion and our enthusiasm, that hot is good, it's fire, it's filled with the Spirit. Well, lukewarm is indifferent, and cold is negative and anti, is how sometimes we see this. But that's not what Messiah is saying. He's saying that hot is good and cold is good. It's lukewarm that's not. And we see that the Messiah, as he writes this, or John as he pens this, listening to what Jesus says, it's about their deeds, not their enthusiasm. I know your deeds. So hot is good. Hot springs, medical, healing, a balm, cold springs, refreshing. And what Messiah says is it's lukewarm deeds which are yuck. Just as the water of Laodicea had no useful purpose, so Messiah is saying that the church serves no useful purpose. Their deeds are not healing, neither are they refreshing, hot, cold. They have no value. I know your deeds, and they are pointless, offering neither healing nor refreshing. The church is condemned indeed by these words. And so Messiah says, in essence, you think you're doing okay. You think all is going well with your programs and your meetings. But the reality is you are wretched like the water. You are pitiful. And we see that Jesus does not hold back to this church at all. You are poor and blind and naked. You have nothing. And Messiah says you can only find what you need in me. And we see how that's an echo of God speaking through the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 55. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. And it goes on. Listen to me and eat what is good, as God sort of speaks to the people of Israel. And we see that echo here in this letter to Laodicea. You say, I am rich. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, and so on. So they're counseled to buy gold, pure gold, white clothes, those symbols of purity, salve, healing salve. One of the things that Laodicea was known for, to have spiritual sight. All the things that they saw around them, all the things they would be familiar with, Jesus says, these material things won't help you as the people of God. You cannot do it yourself. And yet in this letter, after all of this harshness and almost brutal language in the letter, there is a glimmer of hope. In verse 19, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. Those whom I love. And then we see that well-known verse, see, I stand at the door and knock. And what we see here, often we use this sort of in an evangelistic way, but what we see here, and in essence that's right, but what we see is Messiah saying, you must choose. And we see free will in play. Jesus is there, but two things. One, they must choose. And secondly, they must make the effort. And in reference to eating, it's probably reference to that sort of Middle Eastern hospitality. Some of us may have experienced and encountered that, where sitting down around a meal expresses friendship and mutual fellowship. And then we see the reward for our positive response, for putting in the effort, as it were. And Jesus says, you will sit with me, a place in eternity. And we're reminded again, as we have seen in all of the letters, and as we see in this letter, and as we now launch into the rest of Revelation, we're reminded again that our Christian life is not just about the here and now, this life, but it's also about the there and then, eternal life. So I'll stop